started, we were like 10 people. Now it's full.
He remembers.
Yeah, he remembers. So thank you for coming, and Ruth Reichl is here to tell us about her new book. And you're welcome to ask questions. Thank you. It's an honor for us. And that's it. Let's start.
I'm not going to talk a whole lot about my book because you are a group of food bloggers, and this book has zero to do with food, except for the fact that I had used my mother as material in all of my early books, and much of the material about my mother is about what a truly scary cook she was. And so, my first book was filled, the first story in my first book is my mother waking my father up in the middle of the night and getting him to come out, and my father was one of those people who did not wake up easily, and he goes sleepily into the kitchen, and she says, "I want you to taste something," and he obediently opens his mouth and she stuffs something in. And my father loved to tell this story, and every time he told the story, the awfulness of what she had given him improved. It was the first time he said it was cat toes and rotten barley, and then the next time he said it was a mixture of moldy chocolate and aged anchovies, and it just, he loved delighting in talking about how awful it was, and whatever it tasted like, he said it was the single worst thing he had ever had in his mouth. And he leaned over, and you would have to know my father to know how difficult this would be for him to do, because he was he was like a true German gentleman, and the most polite person who ever walked the earth. So if there was any way he could have swallowed it, he would have, but he couldn't, and he spit it out into the sink, and then the taste was still so bad that he picked up the coffee pot and put the spout into his mouth and tried to get this flavor out. And as he was doing this, my mother said, "I thought it was spoiled." And that's one of many of the stories in this book, in my first book. And one of the other stories is about my mother inviting a couple hundred people to an engagement party for my brother and putting 26 of them in the hospital with food poisoning.
Oh my God.
So I'd always had this kind of feeling of, I hadn't really thought about these stories about my mother, and I hadn't given it a lot of thought that maybe it wasn't such a nice idea to, expose my mother to public ridicule. But after the book was published and I suddenly heard people all over telling these stories, I thought maybe I kind of owe her something. And I had this notion that I should write the book that my mother had always wanted to write. She'd always wanted to write a book. She was bipolar, and she'd always wanted to write what it felt like to be a person who doesn't know who you're going to be when you wake up in the morning. I mean, she never knew if she was going to be this wild, manic person or this deeply depressed person. I'm sorry, this is just unnerving me. You've got to stop.